Hi, I'm Jeff McErlain, and welcome to the latest edition of Tone Tips with TrueFire. And this week I want to talk about a laundry list of just little, hopefully tips, helpful things that can help you out on gigs, get better guitar sounds, just a laundry list of ideas that I don't think all necessarily warrant a full video, or maybe they will in the future, but some things that I can quickly pass along to you. So let's get started. Throw out your old cable that doesn't work. If it starts making noise, throw it out. Don't skimp and buy really cheap cables. They don't sound very good and they won't last very long. You don't have to go crazy and spend $100 on a 10-foot cable, but just some solid, decent cables. These are D'Addario, Planet Waves. I find them to be great, really reliable cables. Something like this, mid-priced, really worth the investment. Guitar setup is extremely important and is extremely personal. And the first thing that you should dispel, or I finally let go of, is like what kind of string gauge I should use. There's almost like a badge of honor or courage, like how heavy can your strings be? I think that was all started by Steve Ray Vaughan, who sounded amazing, and he played with super heavy strings, and from all the stories that we've read, he paid a big price for it with his, gluing his fingertips, the nails back together with crazy glue and all these things like that. So for me, I don't have those kind of hands, I don't have that kind of brute force as a player. He had a huge guitar sound, of course, but conversely, Billy Gibbons, to me, has a huge guitar sound, and he uses sevens. So B.B. King used light strings. From all I've read, Jimi Hendrix used like nines and to a light low E strings. It was a mixed set. Lots of guys, they have mixed sets. All these companies do all these kind of things. So you need to experiment with what's best for you. Generally speaking, if you're going to play a lot of legato stuff, you're probably going to have lower action. I could be wrong, but that's just my general experience. And sometimes lighter strings make it a little easier to play. So if you play really hard as a player, like a blues player, and really like to dig in, lower action and lighter strings is probably not the best option for you because it just doesn't give you the best tone. I've been using D'Addario 10 through 46 for many years. Thank you very much, D'Addario. I use them on all my guitars, regardless of scale length, all my electrics. I don't change gauges for my Les Pauls as compared to my Fender style guitars that Michael makes. I just like that. The action I have is sort of medium because I find when I play live, I hit a little harder. That's another point. Playing live, you may play very differently than you do at home. So you need to keep that into consideration. Sometimes my action, I feel like, is a little low when I get onto a gig as it is from when I'm playing at home. So work with what is right for you. The other thing is, listen to guitar players that you really love and see what gauges, strings that they use. And if you want to play like Yngwie Malmsteen, who I love, he uses eights. And to get that great big vibrato, he nails it every time. That makes it a little easier. It's hand strength, and that tone is coming from all those things put together. So if there's someone who's playing you really like, investigate what they use and experiment with that. Listen with your ears, not your eyes. Super important when you're setting levels on your pedals or bass, middle, treble on your amp, anything like that. It's really important because this Marshall right here, I often put the treble on 0, and I will use the presence to kind of get a little more high end. On something like a Maturox or a Fender, I'm going to set those amps very differently because they're different amps with different circuitry. The potentiometers can be different. It can vary from one amp to the next. So what may look counterintuitive, right? If I have the bass on 10 on my Marshall, it may sound really great, but the bass on 10 on a Fender may not sound really good. So just listen with your ears. Just turn on the amp and mess with the knobs until things sound right, and don't pay any attention to where they're actually set. Same thing with your pedals. You may like, wow, I don't realize I don't like the gain that high. Well, maybe on that pedal you do, because the pots are going to be different. The pedal is not, everything is not exactly the same. So keep that in mind when setting your amplifier. The way you set your amplifier up in your room is not going to be the way you're going to use it live. Almost without a doubt, you're going to want to turn the bass down on your amplifier and maybe turn the gain down. There's a thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve, and that's where our ears don't hear the low end and things as well as at low volumes as we do in high volumes. So if you have this big, great guitar sound at a bedroom level, I can almost guarantee you when you get to a gig or rehearsal and use that same exact guitar sound, it is not going to sound very good. Very often you're going to have way too much bass and too much gain. So keep that in mind, that as the louder you get, usually the less bass you're going to want to use and the less gain. The guitar is a mid-bassed instrument. In other words, we kind of sit in this part. There's a whole frequency range that we're going to have in a band. Your bass down here, the guitar kind of sits in the middle here. If we want to cut through, we need to really work on the mids. And mids are really tricky. If you get a kind of like a metallic guitar sound where they scoop the mids, so here's a flat EQ curve, and we're going to scoop the mids, they take down that middle frequency, all back the mids in your amp, you're going to get that chugga-chugga sort of Marshall thing. Miss a boogie thing, I should say. So if you crank that up, it's going to sound like Metallica. Sort of, if you use a lot of gain. The thing about that guitar sound is it doesn't cut very well. I remember seeing Metallica outdoors, and outdoor gigs are tough anyway, but the wind blew and you couldn't hear the guitars really because all the low end, all the mids were gone. I remember seeing Pantera, at it was Ozfest, and the same thing when Daryl was playing, I couldn't really hear anything, but I could hear the bass drum and I could hear the bass. But the guitar, it was an outdoor gig, that frequency can get lost really easily. So if you want to cut through the band, using your mids judiciously is super important. So what may seem very mid-rangey at home, and this is a really important thing, something like a Marshall or a Vox at home I love them, but sometimes when you're playing at home and they're a bit harsh and they're a bit mid-rangey and there's not a lot of low end and there's not a lot of like really warmth coming out of them sometimes, that's because they're designed to be played in a band at volume. When you go into a band and you have like a Vox AC30, it sits right where it's supposed to sit. It's a very mid-range amp, not a lot of low end. So it really just sits where it's supposed to be. You have the bass player fill in that spot. I want to stay away from that area. I don't want to get too thick a bassy guitar sound because then it's going to start to kind of interfere. So it's all about the mix within the band. And the mid-range is super important. And that's where something like a tube screamer, when we talk about someone like Stevie Ray Vaughan, would very often use super reverbs, which don't have a lot of mids. He would use the tube screamer, which is a very mid-based pedal, to push up the mids to cut through for the solos. So, if you want to cut through in your band, it's all about the mids. Not every pedal will work with every amplifier. Classic example is the tube screamer. As I mentioned before, it's a very mid-based pedal. It's a really great sounding pedal for certain kind of amplifiers. I personally don't care for the way it sounds on my old Marshall, because the Marshall is pretty mid-range focused, right? So if I put on something like a tube screamer, it gets very more mid-range than I like. There are other guitar players that may like that sound. For me, it just gets a little too nasal. So at that point, I'll use something that's a little more flat response, like a clean boost, or something that's not really pushing those mids too much. If you have an amp that's a little shy on mids, like a super reverb, which I love the sound of those, but if you want to cut through for your solos, you could step on something like a tube screamer, and that pushes that mid-frequency forward, and you cut through more. That also said, certain pedals and certain amps just don't work well together. You can have one pedal, an overdrive, that sounds really great on one amp, and you plug it into another one, and it sounds terrible. And that's really often due to the front end of the amp, the way the amp processes your signal, and the whole sort of topography of the amp. So just be aware that one pedal, I have certain pedals that I use in certain amps, is what I'm getting at. Certain times it's really disappointing. You're like, man, this thing sounds great on my Marshall, and I'll plug it into my Two-Rock, and I'm like, this thing sounds terrible on my Two-Rock, just because of the design of the circuitry of the pedal and the circuitry of the amplifier. There are a lot of great amps out there that are really great clean platforms, and those are very often more flat sort of sounding amplifiers. So keep that in mind when you are choosing pedals. Now, when I'm going on the road, I'm also very mindful of that. If I have pedals that I'm going to use on like a fly date or gigs like that, I'm going to choose a pedal or two that I know will work with most amps, especially if I don't know what's going to be there. Often we'll have two overdrive pedals on my board just in case, so I have the choice that, well, this one sounds better on this amp and that one sounds better on that amp. So not every pedal fits every amp. Don't like the sound of your amplifier? I think the first thing you could try to do is change your speaker. The speaker is a huge, huge component in the guitar sound. They make, I couldn't believe the difference when I tried some different speakers. So for instance, coming from Marshall's tradition, a lot of them when I was growing up were V30s, vintage 30 speakers, which sound cool, kind of mid-rangey. As I got older, I didn't really love that sound, and I tried a greenback cabinet, which has 25 watt Celestions in it, and I was like, whoa, that's the sound I'm looking for. If you want a Vox to sound like a Vox, it comes down to the Celestion Blue speaker. It's a big part of the sound. If you want like a more mid-range metal kind of guitar sound, V30s are very popular. So, and it can vary from amp to amp. Celestions are going to sound very different from Eminence speakers, and going to sound very different from JBLs and Jensens and all these different speakers. But a speaker change or upgrade, which is really, really big. Sometimes the stock speaker in standard amps may not be that great, so you could upgrade to a better speaker. And just go online. There's tons of people doing demos of speakers. Find out who some of your favorite guitar players are, and find out what speakers they have in their amplifiers. It's a great way and a relatively inexpensive way to upgrade the sound of your amplifier. If you have a mediocre amp and you put in a really good speaker, it can make the amp sound way, way better. Conversely, if you got a really great amp and some junky speakers, there's not much you can do about it. I'm a fan of a really dynamic guitar sound, one where I can really get a lot of emotion out of the instrument just through my hands, right? So for that, generally speaking, I need a cleaner guitar sound. So I would say experiment with playing as clean as you can possibly take, right? A number of benefits. You can play more dynamically. If you play a very distorted guitar sound, there's a lot of compression and there's therefore not a lot of dynamics. So I find I lose a lot of my personality when I play those kind of guitar sounds. I can't play those guitar sounds. Also, on a very practical level, the more distorted the guitar sound, usually, especially if you don't have a sound guy, the less you will cut through in a band mix. So you have to keep on trying to boost the volume. If you have a cleaner guitar sound and you just kind of, as we discussed before, boost the mids a bit, you're going to cut through much better. I also think when I started to clean up my guitar playing in terms of the gain, I cleaned up my guitar playing as a player. I became a much better guitar player, more accurate, and didn't rely upon the gain to help me out. Right? So that's a super important thing as a player. That was big for me. So kind of seems like the older I get, the cleaner the guitar sound I like to use. And there's a lot of kind of if you listen to Van Halen's guitar sound, especially in the golden area of Van Halen, 1, 2, 3, Women, Children First, all that kind of stuff. Is there a Van Halen 3? I don't remember. Okay. His guitar is not that distorted. It's not a super, super gainy sound. So just try experimenting with less and less gain. It's almost like, quitting smoking, I guess. You can go cold turkey, or if you're going to go on a diet, just wean off the carbs, right? So same kind of thing with the gain. Just try playing with a little bit and a little bit less and a little bit less, and you'll get used to it. And I guarantee you'll never really go back to playing super high gainy stuff. Have tons of guitar picks hanging around in your arsenal. I personally like Dunlop Jazz 3s. I love the sound of those. I like playing with little picks. I find they work really great for me. If I'm playing acoustic guitar in a recording, I'm going to use a very light pick because it will sit into a mix really well. So those things are really important. I did a whole tone tips on the pick, but you want to experiment with that. They make a huge, huge difference in the way your guitar sounds and the way you approach the instrument. And also experiment with different kinds of picks, because in different situations they're going to sound better. Playing with a heavy pick, well, sometimes you want to turn that pick around to the round side and play with that. Certain things you want to get a little more of a funky thing. Sometimes that heavier pick with the point can be a little difficult to play with. If you bring it back around to the rounder side and use the back of the pick, you can kind of dig in a bit more, and it's not going to be as loud, so you get a little more dynamics out of the pick. Practice guitar unamplified. Sit on the couch and don't plug in. That way, you're just concentrating on you and the connection between the instrument. I find amplifiers, of course, I always play 3 amps as well, but I find when I play the electric guitar unamplified, I really start to know the instrument really, really well. I can hear the actual acoustic tone of the instrument. It's a really great way to kind of work on your dynamics and get a connection between you and your actual instrument without the amplifier being a part of that. Practice through your amplifier. If you can, practice as close to gig volume as you possibly can, as much as that is possible. One of the great tone geniuses of our time is Eric Johnson. Stories that he would practice all those things at full volume. That is the only way you can really know your rig, right? If you have the pleasure of gigging out every night and touring and things like that, you get to know how to work an amplifier at volume and figure out the ins and outs and the kind of volume, the circuit between you and your amplifier volume creates. And lots of things become a lot easier, and when you see like a master like, say, Eric Johnson, who for me is one of the high points of just having all that so totally together, when he's on with it, there's only one way to do that, and that is being able to practice and play with the amplifier at that volume. Now, of course, there are prices to pay for that because, I know he's got some hearing issues, and, you got to take care of all those things as well. But it is important that you play through the rig that you're going to play through because your amp reacts differently. Like many of the things I've mentioned previously, the louder you get, probably less bass you want. The louder you get, the less gain you probably want because the amp is going to be working harder and giving you all those good things that it will not at a low volume. You won't really know that, and you don't know how to handle it until you turn the amp up. Really important is your gig first aid kit. Never go to a gig without backups of many things. First of all, if you're using a tube amplifier, you always want to have an extra set of fuses and an extra tube in your bag. Okay? So, fuses are super important. They protect your amp from being damaged. If there's a power surge, your fuse will blow before it affects your amplifier. So that's what they're there for, just like on a power strip or at your house, a circuit breaker. It's to protect your electrical system, to protect your amplifier. Sometimes, almost always, if there's a problem with the tube amp, huge majority of the time, it's going to be a power tube. That's almost the most common thing. There could be bigger problems, of course, but usually tubes are not at the quality that they were when they first came out, and so they wear out. They're just kind of like sneakers. You can wear them for a certain amount of time and then they just go. All right, so an extra power tube is important to have in your gig if you want to just go with just one amp. So I bring one, just put it in my gig bag, so I can easily replace that tube if I want to. Of course, it'll be hot, so you want to make sure that your hands don't get burned. But the fuse is really huge. Sometimes you will blow a fuse. You'll blow a fuse if a tube goes, and that's your amp working properly and protecting the amplifier. But sometimes you just blow a fuse because there might be a little bit of a power surge at the gig or dirty power, something like that. And so it happened to me not that long ago. I have a blown fuse here. There it is. You can tell when a fuse blows because it usually smells. And I don't know if you can see. Yeah, it's not going to focus in here. There you go. Kind of worn. It's just got a little black spot on it. That fuse blew. And I had an extra set of fuses. I threw in the fuse, and everything's fine. So it was just the power at the particular location, and the tubes are fine. I've been using it for a month since then with no problems. So, very important. You don't want your really nice amp that you got your great gig, got your gig coming up, and then you get a little power surge or something like that, and your amp goes down, and you can't play your gig because you didn't spend a few bucks on fuses. It's really frustrating. Okay, next. Nail clipper. Putting a nail clipper in your gig bag. Super important. You always forget to clip your nails, I've found, and sometimes you're on the road or you're just doing gigs, you're like, oh boy, that's a little long, or a hangnail or something like that. So I have one of these with me at all times. String winder, string clipper, plenty of these out there. It's the Planet Waves one. It's awesome. Extra sets of strings. Always have your extra sets of strings with you. Extra patch cable and an extra guitar cable. Always bring those. So kind of pretty much an extra of everything. I also, my little PSA here, I can't recommend a good set of earplugs enough. You can get the custom molded ones that you can have different dB reduction. Those are great. I have a set of those. And I also have your basic run-of-the-mill earplugs that you can get at any guitar store or online that have the dB reduction. I usually don't use the foam ones. Those take out too much. Sometimes the ones that you can get, like the ones in the store that are not molded, you can put in and out at certain how deep you put them in is going to be how much more sound reduction you're going to get. You only have you got one set of ears, and it's really important that you take care of them. And surefire way to really mess up your hearing and be pretty miserable if you have ringing in your ears all the time, kind of like I do. So a good set of earplugs is exceptionally important. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Of course, these are all my opinions, so the disclaimer, of course, you may find your mileage may vary. Fantastic. That's up to you. These are just things that I've found through my career and friends of mine, things we discussed when you're hanging out. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you like what you saw, please check out my YouTube channel, Jeff McErlain, my website, jeffmcerlain.com, all my courses at TrueFire. And until the next time, I look forward to seeing you again.